Hey everyone, welcome back to the Freshly Squeezed podcast. We are Jacob and Brooks, and this podcast and this season is specifically about doing something with what you have. It's the whole idea of not making excuses for not having the right resources or waiting for the exact moment that would be best. It's doing something with the gifts God has given you, and realizing that God is always doing something in your life, and we just need to trust God and tap into that and take that first step.
Yeah, well, we'll get into my favorite section, which is saying nice things about people. This is my good friend Charley Dever, and I'm excited to finally have him on the Freshly Squeezed podcast. And like we already mentioned Scott, but we had him on last week. Like Scott, Charley has become a great friend to me over the past 6 months or so in Knoxville. Charley pastors a faith community called Hope Knoxville, which we're looking forward to hearing about today. He also just launched a brand new podcast of his own called The Garden Project, and it's available on all listening platforms and is produced in collaboration with Freshly Squeezed Studios, actually right here at this table in this kitchen.
Nice.
The Garden Project is recorded. Charley and his family have been a huge part of the community that I've found here in Knoxville, and we're grateful to have him on the podcast today. Like Jacob talked about the theme of doing what you can with what you have. I think Charley embodies that in all aspects of his life, not only in how he leads the Hope Knoxville church, but also how he leads his family and how he approaches resources and finances and aspects that I can't wait to get into. Thanks for being here, Charley.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's so good to be here with you guys. Super excited to be a part of this.
Yeah, we're excited too. And Brooks has said so many great things about you over the last several months and finding community in Knoxville, and you've been a huge part of that. So it's super a privilege to have you on today. And one note to make: you remind me of your voice, which I listened to an episode today of your podcast, The Garden Project, and remind me who was the. It was
Most recent episode was with Molly Barnhart.
Barnhart. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yep.
And your voice reminds me of this other podcast that I love listening to for the longest time called it's called The Memory Palace. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Dude, your voice sounds like exactly like that guy. And I'm like, man, that I always thought his voice was the coolest podcast voice.
Wow.
And so I guess that's also means I think your voice is the coolest podcast voice.
Well, I really appreciate that. That's a high
you're
compliment.
welcome, dude.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you should listen to it. You should just hear it.
Yeah.
Although most times
the Memory Palace.
The Memory Palace, yeah. Most times when someone says you look like somebody or you sound like somebody, and then you hear it, you're like, cool. No, it doesn't.
Well, my podcast voice sounds like him, which is different.
Yes.
Than
It's not that different
than your normal voice.
I don't know. I think I speak more softly on podcasts.
Yeah. Your cadence is definitely different. But also it's different.
My preaching voice is very different, and that's because we're outside.
Right.
And with no mic, and there's trains and dogs and lawnmowers and children.
Mainly children. Motorcycles, lawnmowers.
Appreciate that. And thank you, Brooks. I mean, it's been an honor to get to know you, and you've been I'm sure just as much, if not more, of a blessing to my life as I've been to yours. So really grateful for you, man.
Absolutely, man. Yeah. I appreciate it. We'll get into it more, but yeah, it's been a big positive part of the last 6 months, being able to just do community with no pressure, and it just feels natural.
One thing we like to ask all of our guests who come on is this question right here. What is fresh on your mind? What's something that God has been showing you recently?
That's a great question. There's the reason I pause is because I think there's a number of things I could say. I'm always trying to learn, and a question we ask all the time is what is God saying right now, and how are we going to respond to that? So, but I would say one consistent theme for me, and oftentimes because I'm given leadership to this community, Hope Knoxville, it becomes a theme of the community. But one has been working from a place of rest and abiding. And that's actually been something that we started out focusing on 2 years ago when a small group of us moved here from the Midwest. Was rest and really making sure we're starting from a place of rest or abiding, to use a biblical term, John 15. And I think for me personally, that's something that over the last 2 years, particularly through COVID, and I think it just comes with the way we're taught to go about church planting, which we'll get into more. And I think something that can be really dangerous is we lose sight of the importance of rest and abiding, and that certainly happened in my life over the last couple of years. So I would say over the past summer and in the recent months, that has been something that God has really been calling me back to. That if I continue to try to push forward and achieve something or succeed in some way without being healthy spiritually and emotionally and physically, without resting, without abiding in Jesus, and drawing my strength and purpose and identity and vision from Him, then any success that or perceived success that I might have or our community might have is going to be very weak and temporary. I was just reading a book to close on this thought. I was reading a book by Paul Tripp, who's pretty fantastic. He writes on almost every topic. And this book is about leadership, specifically leadership within the church. And he uses an illustration of an oak tree compared to a mushroom. And I love mushrooms, but this illustration is not about the qualities of mushrooms. So an oak tree grows, it can grow for hundreds of years. Its root system is usually as dense and as vast as the branches of the tree. It is a strong tree that can withstand all sorts of storms and wind and everything, but it's slow growth, right? Oak tree, when we hear oak tree, we often think of wisdom and old, elderly, but an oak tree is slow and strong compared to a mushroom, which we get mushrooms in our yard, and it's actually a sign of healthy soil. However, in this image, a mushroom grows up overnight, very weak. If you flick a mushroom, it'll just like tip over and there's no roots. It just sits on top of the soil. It grows out of a spore on top of the soil. And so it's weak, it grows quickly, and it doesn't last. And so so all that to say, sinking our roots down deep in Jesus and what He says and how He lived and lives, is to rest in that and work out of a place of rest. That's been a big theme for me. So hopefully that answers your question. Long-winded,
yeah.
but
No, that's good. A follow-up question to that, actually, because we've talked a lot about rest on the podcast before and in seasons past, but it's something that's widely, I guess the definition is widely changeable. A lot of people see rest as physically, like I need to take a break, I need to take a vacation, I need literal time where I'm doing nothing. But I guess the follow-up question would be what is rest to you? Like with the rest that you're seeking and that you're wanting, what does that look like in your day-to-day walk? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question because it's not binge watching Netflix shows, right? I mean, that can feel, that's an escape, right? There's a difference between
Hmm.
escape and rest.
Mm.
And so I think that rest is best defined by what is the outcome, the result of it. And to quote another author who I really admire, or not quote necessarily, but reference, Henri Nouwen wrote this small article that was published in a journal called "Moving from Solitude to Community to Mission,"
Mm.
and he talks about how the purpose of solitude, the purpose of rest and abiding in Jesus, is so that we are then sent out through community into mission. And so rest should be something that drives us towards what God is calling us to,
Mm.
not a way of escaping something that we're fearful of or tired of or don't want to be a part of anymore. So as far as how you get that rest, I mean, it should involve the presence of God, and that can look very different for different people. For me personally, I have daily rhythms of just sitting and reading the Bible and praying. I like to journal. Um, I enjoy walks, and so walking is restful for me. Hikes. So once a month, I try to get a day where I do a full day hike, and I usually will be somewhere between 14 and 18 miles. So, for some people and most people, and I'm exhausted after that. It's not, restful in the sense of you getting physical rest, but I am filled up from that because I
Mhm.
spend that time totally removed from technology and connection and just spend time with God and prayer, usually meditating on some scripture. So that was a very restful practice for me. But then it always results in, man, I get back to life, and I am pushed into what God is calling me to do, to be on mission, to engage the world around me, and hopefully help others find that rest as well.
Hmm.
And Jesus demonstrated that. I think is very clear. Jesus started his ministry, 40 days of solitude in the wilderness, experiencing some internal turmoil and temptation, and then he comes out of that, and he gathers the disciples around him, right?
Mhm.
In Matthew, at least, calls the disciples to him, and then they go into the cities, healing people and talking about the kingdom and being on mission. So I think that pattern is what we should strive for in our rest.
One thing that really stood out to me, what you said, Charlie, was that oftentimes rest doesn't mean doing less. A lot of times it means fully stepping into something um, with the Holy Spirit, more fully, more aware, and more in tune with the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's doing like sometimes it means stepping away, but sometimes it means stepping in.
Right.
But rest is more of a place that you're just aligned and in step with the Holy Spirit,
Mm.
which is really cool.
Yeah. Love that.
Really cool to think about and a really good reminder for sure.
Well, why don't we spend some time for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you, Charlie? If you want to just talk about what brought you here to Knoxville, maybe share a little bit about your family, share a little bit about Hope Knoxville, and we can shape some questions around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I moved to Knoxville just over 2 years ago from the Chicago suburbs, northwest suburbs of Chicago. And that has been where Chicago is where I spent most of my life. So I was born out east, but really grew up in Chicago. Met my wife in college. I was in Michigan. She was in Alabama. We were interns for a campus ministry geared towards college athletes. We met in Fort Collins, Colorado. So we were long distance for our entire dating journey, and got engaged and went to Chicago so that I could start chiropractic school.
Mm.
And with about a month before starting chiropractic school, felt God calling me in a different direction, and I withdrew from chiropractic school, withdrew my application and enrolled in seminary at Trinity, which is just north of Chicago. And so 5 years of seminary, came out of that, knew we wanted to plant a church, thought we were going to be out west, some, urban center out west. We looked at Denver, we looked at Portland, we considered staying in Chicago. Certainly never would have thought we'd end up in, I guess, what could be called the Bible Belt, in a place like Knoxville.
Mm-hmm.
But God, it was about a 3-year process of discerning this, the kind of the back half of my time in seminary. And, every time it looked clear that we'd end up, I think the most recent place was Denver. We were pretty set on going there. God just closed the door, and we get to the early spring of 2019, and I'm graduating from seminary. We don't know where we're going to end up, but we know we're ready, ready to go do this, or at least, we think we are. We had a lot to learn. But we were working with a network of churches to plant, and they gave us a list of cities that they felt might be worth checking out. And so we started visiting some and came and visited Knoxville, Tennessee, mostly because we wanted to return to where we honeymooned in the Smokies and just spend some time there. And we really fell in love. We actually never got to the mountains on that week-long trip. Really fell in love with downtown Knoxville. It had a lot of the things that we were drawn to in the Western cities, as far as, kind of a dissatisfaction or even a disdain for the church, and a young, kind of vibrant, creative, urban population. And so we were really drawn to that. And we decided, this is where God's calling us. And that was in April of 2019. And then we moved here in August of 2019. So that's the short story of how we ended up in Knoxville. We moved here with 6 other adults, so 4 families. At the time, there was 5 kids in that mix. So 8 plus 5 is 13. Since then, obviously, we've added a number of families, individuals, singles, all sorts of people have joined the community, and we've added a number of kids as well. So we now have, my family, it's me and my wife, Nicole. We have 2 daughters. Isabel is 4, and Nora is just over 1. So we love our little family. I love having girls. I was very excited when we found out Nora was going to be a girl. And it's been fantastic. And we love Knoxville. We live in East Knoxville, what's considered East Knoxville, which is a community that we really deeply love and have no intentions of leaving. We were able to buy a house about a mile and a half from downtown in East Knoxville in the neighborhood of Park Ridge. So that's where we live. And we moved in the week before COVID changed the world. And since then, we've really been able to get to know our neighborhood super well, specifically our block. And we love it. We're really thankful for where we are. So,
yeah, thanks for that brief overview. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the process of feeling called to plant a church, and then a little bit more. It was cool to hear what drew you to Knoxville, but also the process of those 4 families also feeling that call and what that process looked like.
Yeah, well, so church planting was something that I was not very aware of growing up. I grew up pretty much in the church, but was always a part of established churches. There was times where we would know people, family, friends who started a church, but I just never really thought of church planting as a calling, as a way of life. I'll be honest. I kind of thought there was a time in seminary where I thought it's kind of what you do if you can't get a job at a church. Just
You
go start one, which maybe that's the case. I don't know. But no, so about halfway through seminary, there was a number of people who were kind of part of this journey for me to understand my calling to church planting. But what really drew me to it was, a few simple facts. And that is that, churches that are under 5 years old grow largely with unchurched and dechurched people. So, the average person that walks into a new, church plant would have been either dechurched, meaning they grew up in the church and left for a period of time, or unchurched, meaning they never really have had much experience in the church. Whereas churches that are 5 years old or older grow almost entirely from what's called transfer growth. So I believe it's 95% of church growth is what's called transfer growth. And transfer growth would be someone coming from one church to another. Maybe they grew tired of some of the challenges at the current church they were at, and so went across town to another church because the grass is always greener, on the other side, or staffing changes, and just or feeling a calling to something different. There's tons of reasons why people would change their churches. There's or they move to a new town and they were part of a church back in their old town. They come to a new town there. That's transfer growth as well. So yeah, the vast majority of what we call church growth, fastest growing churches in the country, you look at those churches, and they got some people that are unchurched coming in there, but the vast majority of people are coming from another church. And so that to me was like, man, there's a whole long journey past that of kind of understanding on a deeper level why that is. But that was, for me, was kind of the eye-opening moment of, man, I don't want to just attract Christians to a new building or a new event or whatever. I want to create space for people that have given up on the church, given up on faith, or never had those things to begin with. And that is what first drew me to church planting.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I've never heard those statistics before.
Yeah. So those would all be from Barna. Most is probably where those statistics where you can find those. I know Christianity Today does a lot of kind of statistics, surveys, stuff like that. But yeah, Barna is kind of the place to go for some really quality church statistics.
Yeah.
So
I wonder. I mean, I wonder why that's the case. I wonder if it's because it's not. It's always a little uncomfortable to step into a group of, say it's a group of friends and they've been friends forever, and you jump into a group and you just feel out of place. Maybe it's that feeling of like, oh, this is new. I'm jumping in this with a bunch of other people who are new, so that's more comfortable. I'm assuming that's the main reason, but I wonder if there's do you have any other thoughts on why that would be the case?
yeah, so that is a reason for sure. There's a culture that develops, and culture is a good thing. It keeps community together, but there's a culture that develops over time, and that culture is harder to break into as it grows stronger. And so when you look at all right, to then you take that, and if you have unchurched and dechurched people who don't really know much of the church culture or not comfortable in the church culture, they're going to have a hard time breaking into a church culture that has been developed over a long period of time than someone that is coming from the church down the road, where there's a lot of similarities between that culture. So that's how that works. as far as, but there's other reasons. A lot of most church planters don't feel called to plant a church because they want to siphon off, a handful of people from every church in town just to exist. That the vast,
Right.
I'm sure that very few, that is what happens sometimes, but very few church planters go into church planting for that reason. They do want to create space for people that are, disenfranchised from the church. And I think that church plants have room to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more entrepreneurial and unique. And they may do things that are not churchy,
Hmm.
and things that are churchy often, um, make unchurched people uncomfortable.
Sure.
So, um, but the trick and the trick that we've, well, not it's getting away from the what when it becomes a problem is when you put on this front that you are not churchy and open to all types of people, and it's kind of like a bait and switch,
Sure.
and people get hurt
Right.
that way. So I do think, and we'll talk more about it, I do think the church needs to innovate and needs to get creative and needs to find ways to meet people where they're at, to make space for people
Hmm.
that would never walk through the doors on. That's kind of a thing that we repeat a lot. We want to make space for people that would never walk through the doors on Sunday morning, because that can't be the prerequisite for someone being a part of a faith community centered
Hmm.
around Jesus. So yeah, and I think church plants have the flexibility and the freedom to do that a little bit more than established churches
Yeah.
that have people to please.
Totally. Could you talk a little bit more about Hope Knoxville's approach? You mentioned earlier, but we don't have microphones, we don't have a stage. Um,
There is a
there's
stage.
there
We
is a
just
stage. We don't
stand in
use it.
front of it. That's yeah. I mean, that's just
There's cars in the background.
yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about um, that approach. To me, I've used the word when describing it as minimalistic.
Hmm.
Um, I'd love to hear more about what you mean by providing those spaces for people who can comfortably be part of a faith community.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so let's see.
I love
I'll,
asking two parters.
let me start with the second,
Okay.
and then we can circle back. That so the way we're structured, which I would best describe as a family of house churches, right? That are pretty interconnected. I think network is a little detached, a little bit more detached than we are. We
Sure.
certainly have a lot of relationships reaching across the different communities,
Hmm.
and part of that is we only have two currently, two house churches. But the goal is that we'd be a family of house churches, separate communities that exist and can function, um, not really independent of one another, but people can engage in those communities and feel like they are fully a part of a faith community without engaging in the organization, the broader organization of Hope Knoxville.
Gotcha.
So we're a family of house churches, and but we have some centralization. So
Hmm.
I would say we're not an entirely decentralized organization. There is some centralization there, and I can talk about the details of that. But the reason I say that is because we didn't come to Knoxville. Ask the 8 people that moved here. We didn't come to Knoxville with that clearly stated vision for the way that we were going to be structured. Um, and I think some people in that initial group wanted something like that. Others were expecting something a little bit different. But what I think we all came into this with with the same understanding that we were going to prioritize creating space for those that would not come into the church on Sunday morning, would not feel comfortable in a church setting. Um, and what that typically looks like is a worship gathering where there's a clear structure, worship songs at the beginning,
Hmm.
offering, maybe communion, a message, something to close, whether it's worship song, announcements, stuff like that. It's a very unique setting. That someone who's maybe never been in that, or someone who maybe went to a church that was completely different, unconnected to the church they might step into now, but experienced a lot of pain and trauma and hurt at that church, comes into this setting, and it can bring up a lot of that stuff because it's very similar in the way it's structured and the feel of it. So we realized that, in Knoxville specifically, and I think this is characteristic of the vast majority of the country, particularly cities, there's a lot of churches in Knoxville, right? I think over 800 churches in Knox County. So a lot of churches, a lot of Sunday morning experiences. And, but you have less than 20% of people in Knox County that are engaged regularly in the church. And I think so. There was a big church in the suburbs that did a survey, spent a lot of time and money on it. And they said, okay, how many people engage in a church body once a month or more? And I believe they found around 19% was of Knox County does, which is pretty low. So you have, let's say, 80% of Knoxville not engaged in the church. If you come downtown to kind of the area we focus on, which is, maybe a 5-mile radius around downtown, that number is even higher. People that are not engaged in the church, I would assume, single digits of as far as people that are regularly engaged in the church when you get into the downtown population, and especially if you're talking about younger generations. So, but all that being said, that 80 to 90% of people, it's not that they don't have interest in being a part of a community. It's not that they don't have a desire to explore spirituality and faith and go on a journey. It's not that they don't want to talk about Jesus or even look at and understand what's in the Bible. And it's certainly not that they don't want to be a part of something that has a positive impact on their city and their neighborhood and all that. All these things that should be, I think, essentials when it comes to church. So if you have all these people that desire those things, and these are things that should be essential to what the church is, where's the disconnect? That's what we came in trying to frame the question that we came in with. And so that's become, opening up our homes and our lives to people, to our neighbors, to our coworkers, to people we meet in the bars or the coffee shops or whatever it might be. And just being available to go on a journey with people. We call that in the church discipleship, right? And then form communities around that journey. So there's no really like how-to guide as far as starting a community. We're learning as we go, but I don't think we'll ever have a kind of how-to guide of like, this is how we start communities and this is exactly what it looks like and all that. It's organic, and it's formed around relationship, and it's formed around drawing nearer to Jesus wherever you're at, whether you believe everything that's in the Bible or are skeptical about a lot of it. How do we draw nearer to who Jesus is and go on that journey together? And that needs to be done in community. So communities form out of that. So that's the second part of your question. Very briefly, the first part, how we're structured, we have these communities. We have opportunities for people in the communities to engage in a more corporate, if you could say, maybe more traditional church setting. So you alluded to that. We gather on Sunday mornings. It looks different Sunday to Sunday, but oftentimes we have a teaching, we have a musical worship. We may have some discussion or times of sharing stories or some sort of response. Once a month, my favorite thing that we do, we just did this past Sunday, we call it communion meal. Again, that's the last Sunday of every month, and we share a potluck brunch and celebrate communion together. So this is something that everyone in the communities is invited to. Interesting thing though, for us, about 50% of the people that are engaged, we got roughly 60 people engaged in our two communities. And about half of them would engage on that Sunday morning or more of a corporate gathering. Uh, and that's actually a win for us because we want people engaging in those communities who might not be ready to come and hear someone preach, or
Mm-hmm.
might not be ready to come and be a part of a kind of an intimate worship setting where we're singing songs of worship to God. Um, or maybe just don't really have a desire to not, this is not a good reason, but might not just want to get up, and they're used to their Sunday rhythms,
Mm-hmm.
and that Sunday rhythm has not involved church for their whole life.
Hmm.
So it's like, so for us, it's not about doing the least you can possibly do. It's about meeting people where they're at and saying, there's not prerequisites for entering into a relationship with Jesus and being a part of his body of people who are following after him. The church often either explicitly or inadvertently creates prerequisites for that. When Jesus said, "Just believe,"
Mm-hmm.
follow me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, trying to create that in a community setting.
Very cool.
That's really cool. I'm curious I'm curious to hear how the individual home groups operate. Like, what does that look like? I know you all get together and you just explain what that looks like, but what do the home groups look like?
Yeah, so the home groups go on a journey. I mean, when they start, so I mean, I can take the community that currently meets at my house for as an example. For the first 2 or 3 months that we were gathering, we just would have like it was spring of this past year. We would just have a cookout in the backyard, potluck style, share meals together. There really wasn't much agenda other than that. We'd have some serving opportunities. We had a one thing where Nicole with a couple women in our neighborhood organized a cleanup day. Just go around, pick up trash in the neighborhood, that sort of thing. We partner with some ministries and have serving opportunities there. But it really was just sharing meals together and inviting neighbors into that, inviting friends into
Hmm.
that, and just seeing what God. I mean, we didn't say, okay, we're going to spend the next 3 months just doing meals, but we want the communities to be based around relationship. If they're based around who wants to study the Bible together, you're going to probably just bring in a bunch of already Christians. But if you can establish relationship and kind of build community, then you can kind of go on that journey together. And
Mm-hmm.
but now so our community, I would say, it's gotten a lot more intimate, definitely a lot more focused over those 6 months, a lot more focused on, seeking God's will for us in His Word. Right now, we're working through the Book of Acts, and we might discuss every other week or something like that. But if someone's going through something that requires attention, we'll just stop everything and just spend some time in prayer over something or something like that. It's really we have a loose plan, but we're always willing to abandon that plan to uh to do what God's calling us to do. Loosely, so we talk about in our communities, we want to have rhythms and spheres. So rhythms and spheres. So three rhythms, that would be community, uh, um, worship, and mission. So you could call them practices, rhythms, and there's a lot of overlap within those three. But how do we engage with one another? That's community. How do we engage with God? In our house churches, it could be musical worship, but in our two house churches, I don't think we've really had much musical worship in those settings. Not that we couldn't. It's just not the only way we can worship together. And mission, how do we engage with the world as a community? So those are the three, we call them rhythms, through practices. And the spheres are who is it for? So we have three spheres, and we kind of imagine them as concentric circles. The inner circle being, and I don't mean that as a term of exclusivity, but just kind of being aware, would be the intentional core. You could call it leadership. We try to leadership sometimes scares people a little bit, the term. So, but intentionality is something that's a little bit more inviting and accessible. So the intentional core is that small group of people that are thinking intentionally about the community
Hmm.
and using their gifts intentionally to better the community. Beyond that circle, we call it the communal space. So this would be anyone who's really engaged in the regular rhythms of the community. So they're coming, they're a part of the discussions, they're a part of the times of prayer, they're serving with the community, all that. And then the third circle, and I think those two circles are pretty understandable as far as like church settings go. The third circle is very important, and we call that our party space. And this is a space where people can engage who have no interest in church, no interest in faith, just want to engage in relationship. So, I mean, the best way to do that is throw parties, invite neighbors and friends to a party, have bonfires, go out, meet at the bar, whatever it might be, but a space where anyone could come in and engage with the community in that space with no agenda or no other than just conversation, relationship, that sort of thing. So every community needs to think about those six things, right? The three rhythms and the three spaces. And however that community expresses those things, it's kind of up to them. And my role is just to help the people that are given leadership to those communities think through those three spaces. And throughout the life of the community, you might have a very big party space where you're doing a lot of stuff that's really low commitment and just people just engaging. But then as the community goes on and forms similar to a church, that party space gets a little bit smaller, that communal space grows, that intentional space grows, and it leads to real natural, which I think we're getting to this point with both our communities, multiplication.
Yeah.
And you send people within that community out to create a new community where new people can come in, be a part of it. So
Yeah.
hopefully that answers your question, gives you a good
No,
picture of it.
yeah, it definitely does. I think that's a really cool model. And I love the picture. I was actually drawing it out
Yeah,
as you were
good.
speaking it.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a really cool um, way to picture it. I guess when you're inviting people into it, you're not like, hey, come to my home church, or maybe you do. How
No,
do you
I
approach
mean,
that?
so depends on who it is and what you're inviting them to,
Hmm.
and it's
Hmm.
important. I mean, we're super attentive to uh, not trying to deceive anyone, not trying
Yeah.
to like lure people in with saying, "Oh, it's a party," but it's
Yeah.
just you and
Bring your
all
Bible.
my church friends, and part of that is like, do we actually value the party space? If someone for years and years only engages in party space and just has casual conversations, we got a bunch of people that are pretty crazy about Jesus. So, the conversations are going to go to that. I have people that I've been in relationship with for years, and we talk about faith, we talk about the Bible, we talk about Jesus, we talk about spirituality, and hopefully those conversations are a part of their journey wherever that might lead. But as
Hmm.
soon as I start seeing people as a project, whether it's in the community setting or in my own life, not only will that be hurtful to the people that I'm in relationship with, but I think it kind of dehumanizes people in my own mind.
Hmm.
Um, I want people to know Jesus. I want people to experience what He has to offer as far as life and freedom, and most importantly, like purpose, what Jesus is doing in the world. But you know, I trust God to take people on the journey He wants to take them on, and I just want to be a part of that. So I'm never like the kind of whole crusader mentality towards like, or even just evangelism.
Hmm.
I think that word has a good meaning. You see it in the Bible. It's used in the right way. I think a large part of the way we see evangelism today is separated from the idea of discipleship and going on a journey with people, and it can be really harmful. So
Yeah.
that's not yeah. So I'm sorry, I forget what exactly your question was. Um, I don't know if I hit it there.
I think you did. I kind of forgot myself. I guess the idea of how do you even invite somebody into
Oh,
that
yes,
space?
yes. Yeah, so man, just like you'd invite anyone to anything, you know? I mean, we don't hide that we're part of a church community, house churches. We don't hide that at all. But if you don't have an agenda, it won't feel like you have an agenda. So if I'm
Yeah.
inviting someone to a potluck in my backyard who I have a relationship with, they know that a lot of people from my church community are going to be there.
Yeah.
And hopefully, if we have the relationship that I think we have, they're not going to feel like I'm trying to loop them into something.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but it's that's a heart thing, you know. If you got the right heart towards people, uh, there's always misunderstandings, but I think you won't fall into that issue if you find yourself falling into that a lot, where people feel like, man, you're always trying to get me to your church stuff, or you're always trying to jam this down my throat, all that. I wouldn't, if your response to that is, man, I got to change the way I talk about this. I think we're missing the problem. We got to consider
Hmm.
why our heart is in a way that we see people as projects that we can somehow rope into our way of thinking. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my favorite party spaces is Friday nights, getting to come over for game nights.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, it's just been super. It's just been a super easy, laid back environment, and it's not exclusive, but it's turning into the singles group. You know.
yeah. That was not intentional. Nicole and I were talking about that, but we enjoy it. We
Yeah.
enjoy hanging out with singles. It gives us life.
Yeah, and I think us being able to hang out with you guys has been healthy too.
Yeah.
And also, like, I have, it's also a really easy space for me to invite people. Because naturally, like, I want people to be around you guys and the friends I've made there. Like you said, like, not an agenda to like lure people in, but it's like, of course, I want them to be a part of community that's been beneficial to me. And it's easy to be after I try to go to the climbing gym before game night, so it's easy to be like, hey, we're doing this thing
Right.
after, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that the feel of that space is not entirely different than the feel of our Tuesday house church gathering, right? It's like, so because when you are, yeah, it's just more organic and not. I think we talk a lot about this is actually, I just thought about this. I don't know if you guys have heard, but we talk a lot about like our life not being compartmentalized so much that faith just becomes another
Hmm.
compartment of your life. Like I've heard
Yeah.
it illustrated like as far as a dresser, right? Faith isn't just a drawer in your dresser. It permeates everything in
Yeah.
your life. And I think that would be beneficial if we took the same approach towards church, where church wasn't compartmentalized like so much as like this is the church stuff that we do, but rather our community was much more just permeating everything in our lives. That when we get together for game night, and we might got some people that are part of Hope Knoxville, would consider that their church home. We might have some people that that aren't, but are believe, follow Jesus. Some people that don't follow. It's like there's all sorts of people in that space, but it's just as important as far as we're concerned, as just as important as in the life of the community as a Sunday morning worship gathering, uh, because it's just life, man. It's just part of what we
Hmm.
do,
Yeah.
and people can be a part of that.
I think you said it best when you said um, church shouldn't be a drawer. I think I want to put that on a
Yeah.
t-shirt.
That
Don't
really
make
sums
church
it
a
up.
drawer.
Yeah.
I want to get into some questions about the garden project here
Mm.
pretty quick. But I do have one question I wrote down. I specifically wanted to ask you about church in general. as a pastor, or I don't even know if you call yourself a
Yeah,
pastor
I
or
call
just
myself pastor. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
I'm a
it's
pastor.
I call a lot of other people pastors as well.
Okay. Okay. So as a pastor, there are a lot of different perspectives on what the role of the church should be in today's culture, and some people think that it's like church is needed for salvation, like that one time a week you need to go to that, you can't miss a week. And then on the other side of that, there's people who think church is outdated and it's unneeded, and you shouldn't go to church, it's fake. And there's a wide range of what people think about church. And I was wondering what I know you're doing it differently than what a lot of people do, but what do you think the role of church is for us today, and what that should look like? And I'm assuming is probably what you're doing right now, but I guess I kind of want to get just an idea of what you think about the wide range of what church looks like, and if you think there's anything wrong with the different perspectives, if you think there's a right way. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I'll be careful not to say that there's a right way, or that what we're doing is the right way, because that's a dangerous claim to make, I think. But so I
Hmm.
will. There's a couple things I'd like to say there. You said what most of us say, and I say it too. But I think it kind of illustrates how we've gotten off track. But we often say, I go to church, or where do I go? Where do you go to church? Church is not a
Hmm.
place you go. Okay, it's not. It's not a building. It's not an event. Church is a people. It's a community of people that is oriented around Jesus. And I think that what we're what I think what we however your church is expressed, that's not as important as where you start. And if we start with what our church is going to look like, or how it's going to be structured, or this or that, we're already putting ourselves in a position to get it wrong.
Hmm.
So we need to start with Jesus, and how I mean, look at Acts, right, where the church formed. Those that group of people, men and women, started with they're walking with Jesus. Let's just take the last few days. Jesus spent 40 days after his resurrection, uh, teaching these people everything he needed them to know. Kind of tying up the loose ends, making the connections. They're starting to get it right, and then he leaves them with a command, all right, a commission. Make disciples. Okay. You guys are my disciples. Go out and make more disciples of me. Help people to go on a journey to follow me. And it's important. Discipleship is not something for Christians, it's something for everyone. Discipleship includes going, right? Baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, which is the outward expression of uh, inviting people into the faith family, okay, and then teaching. Okay, when we think of discipleship, we just think of teaching, and then evangelism is the going and baptizing. But discipleship is all of it. Discipleship is the journey that someone goes on in relation to Jesus, and everyone is on a journey in relation to Jesus. So what Jesus is calling us to there, the first thing he called us to, that led to what we call the church now, is to be a part of people's journey, to tell them about Jesus, to demonstrate who Jesus is by the way you live, to get out of your comfort zone and space, and to go into the space of others, and enter into their lives, and to understand them better. So it's just as much a part of our journey as it is of anyone else's journey. I don't really use the term of like I'm discipling these people anymore. I'm on a discipleship journey with a group of people, a community of people, and I get to be a part of other people's discipleship journey. So we start with that. It's interesting that in Acts, nowhere does Jesus or any of the apostles say, go start a church, go plant a church, right? They don't do that. They say, let's go make disciples. Let's go talk about the kingdom, talk about what Jesus is doing in the world, and what he did in his death and resurrection. And the natural outflow of that is communities,
Mhm.
because discipleship can't happen alone. It can't happen one-on-one. It has to happen in the context of community. And so that's where we get church. Church forms out of that. So I think that as far as church goes, we do need, if I could use the word, a reformation, especially when it comes to the Western church, because we're all starting with what kind of church we want to be a part of, or what kind of church we want to start. What's the doctrinal distinctives and the tradition and the style? Um, that's not where we need to start. We need to start with, how has God called us to be a part of people's journey of discipleship, and to take part in um, this mission that He has given us to make disciples, and then let communities form out of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that could look like, man, I know some guys, a guy, that recent relationship for me has been so life-giving, and is a guy that is leading he's got a old church building, steeples, white, stained glass. Their primary gathering space is Sunday morning, but it's a neighborhood church that is sold out to serving the neighborhood that they exist in.
Mm.
And the things they do to benefit from that church being in that neighborhood, you don't have to come on Sunday morning. You just have to live in the neighborhood, because that church is making that neighborhood a better place to live. And that's a beautiful thing. I love that. So for me, it's not about model. It's about, how are you taking part in the commission to make disciples, to help people see and understand and follow Jesus, and let your communities form out of that.
Wow. Personally, what's I grew up in a place where I was constantly being encouraged to grow, and I had that all around me for most of my life. And just having moved and having come to a different place here in Florida, I love the church that I'm at, and I love the communities that I'm starting to become a part of. Even just recently, actually, just last night, I started a small group with a group of people, and it was one of the most refreshing nights in the last 6 months. And you saying this is kind of confirming it as far as discipleship and just being with a few people, and the whole small group last night was literally just reading the first part of John 10, and then we all talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thought came to mind, and we all talked about this, which is the gospel is simple, and it's beautifully simple, and it should be that way. And we try to make it so complex and add our systems, which it's easy to do. And I want to do that for everything work related. And I tend to do that with my spiritual life too, where I make so many different, um, I guess, rules and things around, and I build this thing that I built around something that should just be simple and beautiful the way that it is. And I think a lot of people go to church and they feel that missing piece of like, why do I feel kind of empty still? I'm going to church, I'm doing the right things, I'm praying, I'm worshiping with people. And I think the thing that's missing, which at least is the conclusion that I'm coming to, is are you making disciples? Are you building community? Are you doing what you're doing right now and explaining right now so well? And I'm very encouraged, and you're exuding your passion for this, and it's very obvious, and I'm inspired by it, because I think that's exactly what the missing piece is. I think that's exactly what Jesus said to do, and he's like floating off to heaven. He's like, go make disciples. And maybe not and that's
Right.
maybe not exactly what happened, but that's our call. We need to have more relationships and friendships where it's just life, do life together
Mm-hmm.
in a way that honors God and encourages each other and to grow
Yeah.
in what matters most and brings purpose.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Sorry.
yeah,
Go ahead. I mean, to cut you off.
no, I was finished. Go
Well,
ahead.
I just wanted to add to that, like a lot of question that a lot of people have today, particularly young people. And I think you kind of asked it when you originally asked the last question is, do you have to go to church to be a Christian? Right. Like that's a normal.
Hmm.
And man, like, if we approach our faith and we approach Jesus in that way of the call to do what Jesus did, making disciples, helping people go on that journey towards Jesus, then you the question is irrelevant because you can't follow Jesus without being a part of a community.
Mm-hmm.
I say all the time. I don't know. I say all the time. I've said it. Have you heard me? There's no such thing as a personal relationship with Jesus.
Hmm.
Jesus never called us to a personal relationship
Mm-hmm.
with Him. We can know Him uniquely,
Mm-hmm.
like I know you, but our relationship would never exist out of the other people that
Mm-hmm.
like the way I know you is how I see you engage with other people,
Mm-hmm.
and how I know other people know you, and how they appreciate you, and a relationship must exist in community,
Mm-hmm.
and our relationship with Jesus is no different. So the church is the body of Christ, and we're the community of people that gather around Jesus wherever we are. So if that's a couple friends in a living room, then that's an expression of the church. And as long as you're taking part in what Jesus has called us to do, I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
And if that's a larger church, I don't, if that's a thousands of people in a room and stadium seats, then I think there's some validity to that too. You have different issues that come up in that setting, but I think you have issues that come up in our setting as well, and you got to
Yeah.
navigate those.
Yeah. I just, it came to my mind because John 10, the beginning of that, it's talking about the good shepherd. Jesus is our good shepherd. And he talks about the sheep that goes astray, and Jesus doesn't, you know, take the sheep and, you know, mentor the sheep on its own. What he does is he brings it back to the rest.
Hmm.
And I think I've never thought about it that before, about
Mm-hmm.
it that way before. And that's kind of a beautiful picture. Like we need people,
Yeah.
we need other people to grow with. And that's exactly what Jesus intended it to be,
It's good.
is his sheep together.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we kind of close off, I think if you want to hear more about Charley's vision for ministry in the church, definitely listen to the Garden Project. Would you like to give like a brief overview of the Garden Project?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the Garden Project it's a podcast, and it stems out of a teaching series that we did around Easter. That was all about the resurrection and focused in on the image of the garden. And well, I think the best. I don't know if you guys want to include this, but the intro to the Garden Project
I
podcast.
I want to do that for
Yeah,
sure. I actually thought about that. Listened to the episode this morning. I'm like, I think we should just take that soundbite
yeah. Put
and
that
play it.
right here. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. While we often think of these two spaces as being separate from one another, that was not always the case. The Bible tells us that God planted a garden, and in this garden, heaven and earth were not separate spaces, but they were one and the same. This garden was a place of beauty, goodness, innocence, and abundance. It was a place where God and humankind lived together. God shared his garden with the people he created. But it wasn't a space where we sat around and did nothing. We were given a job to do. Our job was to care for the garden, to nurture and cultivate it, and most importantly, to expand it. You see, the Bible makes it clear that when God created everything and planted the garden, he didn't think of his creation as the final and complete product, but instead, it was the start of a project that involves us. God's project was to make a home with his creation. While this home started in the garden, the plan was that God and humans would work together to make the whole earth their home, the whole world filled with beauty, goodness, innocence, and abundance. The problem is we haven't been the best partners in God's project. Rather than participate with him in spreading the garden, humans have done a lot to destroy the beauty, goodness, innocence, and abundance in the world. What is so shocking about all this is despite often failing to partner with God in this project, he has not stopped wanting to partner with us. God is still working on the project that he set out to do at the beginning, and he still invites us to partner with him in it. He invites us to work with him to overcome brokenness with beauty, to overcome evil with goodness, to overcome corruption with justice, and to overcome scarcity with abundance. The Bible ends with a promise that one day God's project will be complete, that he will make his home here with his creation forever, that the whole earth would be filled with beauty, goodness, innocence, and abundance. This podcast tells the stories of people who are taking part in God's project, people who are using their talents, passions, and profession to work towards this promise. This is the Garden Project. Man, that idea that what God is doing in the world is not this kind of like, we're going through life and eventually it's all going to be over and some of us go to heaven, some of us go to hell. That's not actually the biblical a story of what God's doing in the world, that he's actually restoring the world he created and more importantly, inviting us to be a part of that restoration. I mean, it's amazing. And what has struck me the most about this as I've grown in my understanding of this is realizing, how many people who love Jesus and read their Bible don't know that story. And as well as how many people who have grown up in the church and left don't know that story. And when they hear it, they're like, man, I love that. Like, that's kind of what I've been looking for, being a part of something that makes this world a better place and rights the wrongs that I see in this world. And I didn't find that in the church. And so for us, it's been really, really impactful, and it's given us purpose in everything that we do. And so, and also you go on like, and we haven't talked much about this. We could talk more about it, but the metrics of success within the church are really self-defeating if you feel that church should be centered around making disciples. Because the metrics are how many people can you get in a room, how big can you get your budget, and how many people can you get to make like declarations of faith. Okay. It speaks nothing to the journey that people might go on, however long it might be. It speaks nothing to the amount of people that are living life on mission and taking part in what God's doing in the world. It's just numbers. And as we talked about at the beginning, if 95% of church growth is transfer growth, do you even want those numbers? Are those numbers actually what we want to call successful? So what for 2 years, it's taken us kind of this idea is like, well, we know what we're doing is what God's calling us to do, and we see him doing great things, but how do we actually measure it or show it it as a successful thing. And the best way to do that, as we've found, is telling stories. So for me, the Garden Project Garden Project podcast, for me, the Garden Project podcast has been an opportunity to tell those stories of how people are taking part in what God is doing in the world through their gifts and their talents and their passions and profession. And so I was telling someone yesterday, if no one ever listened to the Garden Project podcast, it would still be worth it, because my focus in that is the person I'm interviewing who gets to tell their story and gets to really think about how God is using them every day of their life to do something amazing. And man, if that's all that came out of it, I think we inspire people too who get to listen to it. I know we have, but if that's all that came out of it, it would be valuable to tell those stories. So yeah, it's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's been fun being able to work on that with you and partner with Freshly Squeezed for that.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you guys.
I know I haven't had a.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Charlie?
I was just saying thank you guys for partnering with us on it, because I couldn't do it without you. There's no chance.
Yeah. I'm more excited about it now than I have been. I haven't had a huge part in playing, besides being associated with Brooks, because he's been doing most of it or all of it actually. But I'm excited that we're able to be a part of that and help with that, because that's you definitely have a gift, which is a lot of things, but I think the main thing for me is that you're just surrendered to what God wants to do where you're at. And that's beautiful. And I said this earlier, but it's just really encouraging to me, and it's really inspiring to me. I love this conversation. This is definitely one of my favorites so far. And it's I think can encourage a lot of people to see their life differently and not make church a drawer, not make church a thing that you do once a week, which has always been the cliche thing to say, don't make church the thing once a week. But I don't know if there's ever been, I think there's always just been the critique, don't make it. And then now what do you do? And I think you've laid out a pretty awesome and clear idea of what it looks like to make church a part of your life and the way that you live and the way that you treat other people. So I just, thank you, Charlie, for doing what you do. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think that that really goes along with what the theme that you guys have had in mind for not only this episode but the last episodes of doing what you can with what you have, because we've gotten a glimpse of it here in COVID, and I think that it will continue. But if we can't imagine how to do church without the professionals, right? Like full-time paid staff, pastors, like I am currently that, without the properties, right? The 3 Ps: professionals, properties, and programs. If we, you take those things away, and COVID took some of that away. You take the Sunday morning gathering away. If you take that away and you no longer have church, then what you were calling church is not actually church, and we need to imagine, like, what does it look like to have church on a minimal budget or no budget? What does it look like to have church without paid staff? I don't want to say pastors, because pastors is not a paid profession. It's a gift. What do you like? How do we have church if we don't have our programs? Our VBS or our men's ministry or women's ministry, like all these things. They can be great things that the church does and has, but they're not essential to it being church. So, right now, we've been incredibly blessed to be able to do what we're doing, and I've been able to do it full time. But I don't know if that's always going to be the case, and we really are trying to set things up so that, if Hope Knoxville exists a few years from now, with some bivocational staff, or still no building. We have no intention of having a building. We're not opposed to having property that we can use for the mission, but as far as a church building goes, what would it look like? What would it look like 10 years from now? If and I think so doing what you can with what you have, I think we all can realize the role that God is calling us to play within the church. And Garden Project Podcast is telling those stories. Our communities, we have 2 communities. I'm going to go to the other community tomorrow night, and it'll be the first time I've been there in 4 months, I think. So I pop in, but that community, if I were to, I don't know, disappear tomorrow, the communities would continue and they exist. I hope I bring some value to what we're doing, but so does everyone else, and so, we just need to imagine a world where the things that we call church may be taken away, because we just don't have the finances for it, or we got a lot of empty church buildings in Knoxville. I say turn them into apartment complexes. That's probably blasphemous, but it's just, it's no good to have this empty building on a street corner in Knoxville where 10 people gather for an hour a week. It does no good for our city. And we need to reimagine how we do church. The fastest growing churches are growing in places where they have nothing. And our people are trying really hard to stop the church from growing. We like to think we're persecuted here in America, but we're certainly not. And we have a lot of benefits being a church and being a pastor. And I know a lot of pastors are afraid of those things getting taken away, but man, I think it could only help because you see what's happening across the world, and I would love to be a part of what's happening in Iran and India and China and the movements that are happening there and the churches there, with no professionals, no property, no programs, but a whole lot of discipleship and passion. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we'll certainly leave some information about you, and if people want to pick your brain more and get in contact with you, or if they're local to Knoxville and want to get involved with Hope Church and other initiatives going on, we'll definitely link some information.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Charley. Appreciate you.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Super grateful to be on.